Hey, Mama, you're listening to the Resting in Motherhood podcast with your host and new motherhood BFF, Brittni Maya. I'm a certified infant sleep specialist, but more importantly, I'm a mama navigating my own motherhood journey right alongside you. So join me weekly as we discuss the real, raw, and relatable truths of motherhood. We'll touch on everything from the ugly and difficult things we think but are afraid to say out loud, to the beautiful moments that uplift us and bring us so much joy in motherhood. So go ahead, take a deep breath, embrace the chaos, and join me for heartwarming conversations that'll leave you feeling understood, inspired, and ready to tackle whatever motherhood throws your way. Welcome back to the Resting in Motherhood podcast. Today is an episode that I think everyone is going to love, and I am so excited to introduce our guest, Cheryl Sew Hoy, who is the founder of Tiny Health. And Cheryl, if you would just like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Brittni. I'm so excited to be here and be on your show. I am a mama of two. I have a 4-year-old. He just turned 4 yesterday, actually.
Oh, wow. Happy birthday to her.
Thank you. Yeah, that's my son, actually. And my daughter was my firstborn, 6 years old. Also, her birthday was about a month ago. And I'm also an entrepreneur. I started a company called Tiny Health. I'm the CEO and founder. And it's really inspired by my 2 kids. I had 2 different births with them, one through a C-section birth and the other one through a VBAC, which is a vaginal birth after a C-section. And I had him at home as well during the pandemic. So these 2 births resulted in a bit of a different health sort of condition for my 2 kids and inspired me to look into gut health in the first 1,000 days. So I started Tiny Health. Before Tiny Health, I had started other companies before. So I have been, sort of in this founding journey. But, like with my first child, I took a break a little bit. And when I was pregnant, my second child was when I was really digging into so much research around the gut microbiome health. And I was thinking maybe I'll start a new company. And it really did make sense when I found out there's just no baby gut test in the market. And something that I thought, if that benefited me and my family, that should be something that every parent should have access to. So that's why I started Tiny Health.
You're truly an inspiration just to be like in the motherhood journey and then create something that is so deeply impactful in the lives of babies. And I told you before we started, I pressed record, that I recommend lots of my clients to Tiny Health. I also chat about it on Instagram. I've done a Tiny Health test for my daughter. But for somebody listening who doesn't know what Tiny Health is, and you explained it a little bit, but can you tell us what Tiny Health is and what you do?
Yes, for sure. So we are the first at-home stool tests for gut health for mom and babies. So we specialize in kids 3 years and under. So it's a really easy at-home stool test. You get like a Q-tip like that, and you sample directly from their diaper. Or if you have an older child, you can sample from a toilet paper and mail it into our lab. And then within a few weeks, you get a full interactive results back, really just explaining what all the gut bacteria is in their guts and what does it mean? Do they have the right balance of good versus unfriendly bacteria? And then what to do about it if there are major imbalances. So we give you a report from, not just a report, but what are the actionable steps you can do from a dietary nutrition perspective, but also a supplement and lifestyle change perspective. So we started with that baby gut test as our flagship product. And then when I had the VBAC with my son, I realized that a vaginal birth and breastfeeding, I breastfed my son for 2.5 years, wasn't technically enough, because if babies are basically acquiring their first microbes from mom, so babies are sterile in the womb, the fetus does not have a gut microbiome. They actually get their first microbiome from the mom through the vaginal canal, and then through breastfeeding. The mom is continuing to transfer these gut microbes from her gut to the baby, which is magical and
totally
really interesting, right? And that tends to heal the baby's gut if baby was exposed to antibiotics through C-section or medication. However, what I learned was if the mom's gut wasn't in the right balance either, which I discovered I didn't have the right beneficial bacteria to pass on to my child, then mom needs extra support too, and baby needs extra support. So we also have a pregnancy prenatal stool test, as well as a vaginal test, because if the baby's going through the vaginal canal at birth, you want to check if your vaginal microbiome is also in the right balance. So the mom and baby gut tests are really the flagship products. And then now we've expanded to include the whole family because, people have more than one kids and they have an older sibling. And then the dad wants to test their microbiome too. So the mom tests and the dad tests, and dads can certainly pass on microbes to the child too. So you're sharing and kissing and hugging and all that in the same home environment. We have a family membership option now because as you're thinking about how gut health is so important and that 80% of our immune system is in our guts, you have to improve your gut health as a family, not just for your child or your baby, which certainly is the most important thing, right? As you know, in motherhood, a baby changes your entire life and perception, and you do anything for them, but it also teaches you to take care of yourself.
Yeah. Well, and I love that because you're right? If we're looking at improving, like making lifestyle changes, because that's one of the things that I love about the tiny health tests and like the portal is it's so user friendly. You don't need to be a biologist or a doctor to like know what's going on within the portal, but you give like light, realistic tips, right? Like try, start. For my daughter, it was more like leafy greens. That was one of the things, which I knew before we even did the test that I needed to do that. But okay, so if I'm working on her gut, like that's a lifestyle change that we can all make together. So I love that you've created it for the whole family. That's amazing.
Yeah, we give you tips like, obviously toddlers, they don't take on to leafy greens a lot, but my hidden secret is smoothies. So they take anything. If you add a banana, you can add almost any kind of fiber in it. But you're right. Then I also consume that same smoothie oftentimes, right? And you can add flax seeds and other seeds. But you like sometimes your child is kind of not eating a certain food, and it's reflected in the gut test. It's really interesting. We have another measurement for chitin, which is a type of sort of like protein. And it's like you get that through shrimp and insects and mushrooms too. And so it's funny because we do some consultations with parents, and rarely we see this index really high, right? And then we ask the parent, like, wow, like, does your kid eat a lot of shrimp or mushrooms? And the answer is yes. So it's really interesting when you see kids not eating a certain food, it reflects in their gut bacteria.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that what am I trying to say? We don't understand the full importance of gut health, right? Because it's just not something that's talked about. And while I think the Western medical system is wonderful, there's lots of benefits. I think when we go to the doctor, sometimes like if we have concerns like with the gut or like gas or differences in stools or eczema or different things like that, a lot of the times it just kind of gets like brushed under the rug as normal.
Exactly.
So to be able to actually test the gut and see like, okay, what is the gut telling us? Because it's not going to lie is really a powerful tool to have as parents.
Yeah. And what I really want to talk about actually is whether you realize it or not, we're actually in this pediatric chronic condition crises. I'm not sure if you know of the stats, but CDC reports that more than 40% of children today have at least one chronic condition, like eczema, allergies, asthma, diabetes. It's a lot, and 40% is, or even some say 50%, right? That's the new norm, but it shouldn't be normal. It should not be accepted. And, a lot of it could be due to overuse of antibiotics. This is what I discovered. And, also through more C-section rates, right? Higher, our countries at about, I think they're 33% C-section rates.
Oh, wow.
And there is a study showing that half of those C-sections are not medically necessary. For me, my first child, and this is where, I can share a bit of my personal story. My kids were breached. Both my kids were breached.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so, depending on what hospitals you go to, it's an automatic C-section, right? So I was looking into like, okay, well, if I had, an elective C-section, is that bad? And that's when I first uncovered that if the baby is not passing through the mom's vaginal canal, they are born missing certain microbes from mom that will help train their immune system. So when I mentioned baby is sterile in the womb, there's no microbiome in the womb. They're basically born with no immune system as well. And the way their immune system is being trained is by these microbes they acquire from mom initially, and then the immediate environment. So the right balance of beneficial protective immune training microbes and unfriendly microbes is essential for the immune training. So what I read when I was doing the research on C-section versus vaginally born babies is that vaginally born babies have a really different microbiome from C-section born babies, and that C-section born babies are at a higher risk for eczema, allergies, asthma, and hay fever as an adult. But that goes back to immune training. If their immune system isn't trained correctly, then a normal baby's immune system is responding correctly to these allergens, skin allergens, dietary allergens, respiratory allergens. So when they have these allergies, it means their immune system at birth wasn't trained correctly. So you can course correct. So the thing that I uncovered is like not just that, oh no, they're at high risk. And I did end up going through labor for 16 hours with my first child, because I knew that even her sitting in labor and, almost having that emergency C-section is better than an elective C-section, because you're letting baby naturally initiate that, coming out of the world, and the labor process helps them adjust to the world, and spending some time in the vaginal canal helps. And so I went through all that, tried my best. And I wish I had started the company back then, but I was still doing my research, that she probably has a really imbalanced gut at birth. And I was trying to reduce her risk. And I read these papers that you can modify her gut. And the number one thing you can do is breastfeed. Then I learned later that, again, if I didn't have the right microbes in my gut, then the breastfeeding helps with other things like antibodies and growth hormones and macronutrients, but it may not help in restoring her gut, in the sense that if I had a good gut, then I really could be restoring her gut through my breastfeeding. So, but there are things that I can do. I can give her specific strains of probiotics, or I can take them myself, and they're not all equal. Some babies don't require probiotics, and sometimes it depends on the strains they need. Different strains of probiotics perform different functions. So I realized that there's a bunch of steps a parent can take, including when you're starting solids, what kinds of solids do you start with to really help her with her gut development, which again is tied to immune training, immune system development. And so I felt that, we can really prevent chronic conditions if we fix or rebalance an infant gut early on. And so that's what I did with my son. I had a vaginal birth with him, but again, my gut was deficient. So I gave him about 3 weeks of specific strain of probiotic, and he ended up not getting any eczema. My daughter has eczema, food sensitivities. She's gluten and dairy intolerant. She didn't sleep well as well. That was the other really, really stark thing. She could never nap for more than 45 minutes as a baby. And my son was able to nap for 2 to 3 hours, no problem. So there was a remarkable difference between both their health as well as their sleep patterns.
That's amazing. And just such an aha moment, and beautiful thing to see how connected we are as the mother to our baby, and how really we need to be prioritizing our health too, which is going to impact our children. But I also love that you brought up the differences in the food sensitivities for your daughter, the eczema, and the sleep, because that's one thing that I love about Tiny Health is you do have sleep markers within the test that help, but it's it's hard when you're in it, but if you think about it, well, yeah, if a baby's itching or they're really like, they have that eczema or they're uncomfortable from a food sensitivity, sleep is going to be more difficult because they're simply uncomfortable. And you touched on this as you were talking about that, but specifically, can you talk about why gut health is so important in the first 1,000 days of life?
Yeah, so it goes back to, it's a little bit scientific, but I'll try to explain it in a very layman's term. Tell me if you want me to, clarify. So when a baby's born, you imagine their guts as like a theater room, and there's only 10 seats in a theater, right? And they're, again, like supposed to get most of them from mom. But sometimes it doesn't happen. Even through quick labor, they may not be getting a lot of seeding, microbiome seeding from mom. But the essential part is that, I would say like 5 or 9 out of 10 seats should be inhabited by these beneficial bacteria called bifidobacteria. They're specifically adapted to digest breast milk. So your breast milk actually is made out of 1/3 HMOs, which is human milk oligosaccharides. They're the prebiotics that are undigestible by the infant. So your infant, when they're drinking your breast milk, 1/3 is going through their stomachs without being, like extracted, if they don't have the right bacteria in their guts to digest that 1/3. So it is important. It's a little bit scientific, but that equation is important. So the breast milk really is there to feed, 1/3 of it is to feed the bacteria in your infant's gut. So if your infant's gut is missing that bacteria, which there's one study showing that 9 out of 10 infants are missing bifidobacteria because of modern lifestyle, which is a really huge number, right? And really stark. So, again, kind of knowing that 10 seats, you want 9 out of 10 to be good bacteria. 1 should be E. coli. You want 1 bad actor in there to train a baby's immune system. Some rare cases, we see babies having no E. coli in their guts, which means they're maybe over-sanitizing, maybe they're, using too much Clorox in their households, and babies licking the floor, and a lot of antibacterial chemicals are getting into their infant's gut and destroying even not just the bad bacteria, but also the good bacteria. So we also want to see, really a right balance of beneficial versus unfriendly bacteria in the early days, right? As your infant starts solids at 6 months, around 6 to 9 months, then that seed expands from 10 to 20 to like 50, right? And so Brittni, if you did an adult gut test, you may see 300, 500 seeds or like species in your gut. And that's it's reached adult-like complexity. So your child basically reaches that capacity around between 3 to 5 years of age. So I think your daughter is probably in that transitional stage to an adult-like microbiome. But in infancy, because the seeds are expanding, it's very malleable. It's very easy to pluck out the bad actors from that theater room because it's growing, right? It's kind of evolving. But the key part to remember here is that their immune system is being trained by these actors in the seat. So not only is it easier to remove and replace them, it's kind of like it's so crucial to train their immune system in the first 1,000 days, which, by the way, starts during conception. So mom's microbiome and what she eats, her diet, may also influence the baby's not just gut health and immune system, but behavioral health too. There are connections to a child's mental health at age 2 connected to mom's diet during pregnancy.
Wow.
So there's just a lot of microbiome research in like the early days that's coming out, and it's very strong and scientifically backed. The reason why the science is much stronger in the early days is because when the seats are so limited, right? There's only 10 and then 20 seats. It's much easier from a scientific perspective to tell what should be there, what shouldn't be there. And if the function of the baby's gut in the first 6 months is really just to digest breast milk, it's very simple. They haven't been enriched by a variety of diet and nutrition. And so as the baby grows to eat more solids, that's when diversity increases really quickly. And it becomes more complex to kind of like tease apart like what should be the right balance of microbes in their guts, right? So the course correction really should be in the early days. I can't stress this enough, how, we've had so many case studies And so many parents whose infants have colicky symptoms, gassiness, reflux, and they tried so many conventional methods, including acid reflux medication, like all kinds of things, and nothing helps them. And when they finally do a tiny health baby gut test, they find their babies have 80% E. coli in their guts. Remember, they should really only have 10% E. coli, but some babies have 80, 90%, and their symptoms tied to it oftentimes. So if you have a baby who can't sleep well, frankly, are colicky, gassy, constipated, chances are there's something in their gut that is not in balance.
Which I love that you're talking about this, because, and that you're providing parents with these tools, because that's one of my biggest not problems, but when clients come to me, one of the biggest things I see is their baby has reflux. And so I'll dive into some education on, well, reflux is a symptom, really. We need to be looking at what's causing that reflux. Why is it happening? Yes, the root cause. And it can be really frustrating, right? When you're going to the doctor and they're just prescribing like the reflux medication, which oftentimes for a lot of clients actually doesn't help them a lot. Or they're just kind of like, oh, it's normal, they'll grow out of it. But we need parents to know it's not normal. Let's get to the root cause. Let's look into their gut so that we can make a change and make your baby more comfortable.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting, right? We've become so accustomed to hearing, oh, it's normal, it's going to pass.
Yes.
But if there is a difference in a baby's gut that has these colicky reflux symptoms, where there's 90% E. coli and there's no beneficial bacteria, versus an infant gut who sleeps well, has no symptoms, and have 90% beneficial bacteria, then you know something isn't right? And you can see the data for yourself. And, I think 90% E. coli sounds scary, but that is, a baby is able to tolerate so much unfriendly bacteria. They're not going to get sick. I think sometimes when parents see 90% E. coli, they really freak out. Or even some parents who see 10% Salmonella enterica, they panic. But it's really because a baby is they're not sick. They may see chronic symptoms and discomfort, but they're not sick. And it's because the babies are able to tolerate these large amounts of unfriendly bacteria. However, it's kind of triggering a lot of inflammation, and eventually it will, but it's a higher likelihood that it would turn into some sort of chronic condition. This is where we want to really avoid. If you and I, as an adult, had even 5% E. coli in our gut, we would be very sick, and we would be probably throwing up, having IBD, IBS. It goes to show how much, how different an infant gut is compared to an adult gut. And there are stool tests that, is in the market right now, but they're for adult ranges. So you should never use an adult stool test for an infant or a baby, because they're going to tell you the wrong things. These stool tests for adults, they don't they'll assume your baby who has maybe 10% E. coli is really sick, when, again, remember I said 10% E. coli in an infant is actually really healthy. So it's really important to check that the tests are right for your age group.
Totally. I have a question for you, for my mamas who are listening who have a 3 or 4-year-old, and let's say they did have a C-section. They didn't breastfeed for whatever reason, and they're listening to this freaking out, oh my gosh, I didn't catch this in time. What would be and obviously they would need to do a test, but is there hope for them? I just want to give them hope that it's okay.
Yeah, of course. And there's and so much mom guilt around,
right,
things you can't change in the past. I wish I'd known a lot of these things earlier on too. I didn't do for my first child. So, again, when I started Tiny Health, I think she was about 2.5, right? And then now she's 6. So, I think it's hard to say reverse conditions and prevent. If you catch it earlier, I think there's a good chance you can prevent and reverse if you've already had that condition. With older kids, I think what is important to understand is maybe you can never get rid of that eczema, but you can find ways to reduce the symptoms or flare-ups. And that's certainly what I've done with my kids. So she was gluten and dairy intolerant, and I could see some digestive markers in her gut tests being, like out of range. So I've been working to fix that and kind of like, add those fiber rich plant foods in her smoothies and, kind of give her the right balance of nutrition she needs. And certain strains of probiotics, and it has helped her. And now, we do raw milk, A2 raw cow's milk, and she's now able to drink dairy again or take dairy.
Wow.
And, there's just ways that you can basically help your kid, get to a right gut balance and to reduce symptoms. So again, like the difference here is if you test earlier in the first 1,000 days, chances are you can truly prevent and reverse chronic conditions. I would say 3 and on, it becomes tougher. And there we don't want to make promises like that. And we never do. It's not a treatment. It's not a diagnosis. It's a wellness test that educates you on your child's microbiome and your own microbiome too. But for older kids and for even adults who have gut issues, bloating and constipation and things like that, you can always find something in the gut to, work on and improve. And oftentimes you'd see hopefully symptoms improving through once you've worked through that.
Totally. Yeah. And I thank you for answering that, because I know like me, I'm like, if I can imagine the moms who are like, I didn't catch it in the first 1,000 days, but there is hope. And like I said, I didn't test my daughter until last year. So she would have been 3.5. And there's still, I need to test her again. And that's actually a question for you. How often do you recommend retesting?
Yeah. I took a peek at your daughter's test, by the way, and it looks great. I would, she, if you click on a PDF to see her results, we now have a population graph that compares her to all the samples. And we've served over 25,000 families at this point in the past 2 years. And she's in a pretty decent percentile. And it's one of the better toddler guts I've seen. Her only issue is butyrate. She doesn't have enough butyrate, but everything else is like really, really good and in range. I would say as an upkeep, I like to do it twice a year. And an interesting story. So my whole family moved from California to Austin, Texas about 2 years ago. And, you'd think, just moving and, it's the stress of moving and whatnot. But once we settled in, I did a gut test 3 months in for my whole family. And we did it before we moved in California, and everyone's gut health kind of went downhill.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my gosh, why is that? And I'm like, okay, maybe it's the food source. In California, I had really clean water and produce from the farmer's market, and I source my meat from farms. Here, we're starting from scratch, right? So, okay, let me source my food and all that. And then it still wasn't quite good. Like I did round 2, and then we started seeing skin issues. My whole family had like weird skin issues, from eczema to wounds that won't heal easily. So we finally tested our water, another testing, and it turns out our water in Austin from Lake Travis has arsenic, lead, and uranium, like radioactive substance. So we filter our drinking water, but now we're showering in it, hot water in it, we're gargling with it. So we did a whole full house filtration. And so now when we did our gut tests again, everything finally went back to more normal. So it's interesting, like so many factors can influence your gut health, and you may not know. It could be moving to a new neighborhood, maybe changing the source of your food or water, filtering or not. Switching daycares or schools, they're in a different environment. How much exposure do they get to nature and pets? There's so many things that can change. And then antibiotics is another huge thing, right, for kids. Like so many of our moms come to us when their kids have an ear infection and needed antibiotics. And most of the time, sometimes it's needed and life-saving, but most of the time, ear infections are actually viral. and not even bacterial, right? But we don't know that. And I think I would encourage parents to ask their pediatrician, is this viral or bacterial? Most of the time they're going to say, I don't know, but here, take this anyway. And, just in case. So I would, I think if you have tools to, I think it's hard when you don't have tools. Like if I don't give my child this medication, what else can you do? So there is a whole world of functional medicine or integrative medicine where, I do give my child, if they do have a health issue like a cold or a flu, really high doses of vitamin C, vitamin D, sometimes vitamin A, and certain herbs that are, again, this is not medical advice, but there are just ways that I feel confident with my toolkit when my child is slightly sick. So I'm not just jumping straight away to antibiotics. Now, of course, again, in some cases it's necessary. And if it is necessary, ideally we have your child's baseline gut test so we know what was there before, because the child's gut is very sensitive to antibiotics. And these beneficial bacteria, specifically bifidobacteria, are very sensitive to certain doses of antibiotics, especially in long courses. And if it's broad spectrum versus narrow spectrum, which means it kills everything in a broad spectrum. So you also want to make sure that as much as you can, the antibiotics given are narrow spectrum. They're really targeted and focused. So then I would do a gut test after to see how much their gut is affected and help them restore to baseline, right? So oftentimes we give medication, we don't think to restore, we don't think that it's destroying the maybe potential bacteria, bad bacteria, but it's also destroying the good bacteria. So we just have to be more mindful on how to replenish the good bacteria post-treatment. So if anything, if there's a takeaway for this podcast, it would be, always remember to replenish after you kill.
That's really good advice. And one question I have for you, and I know that this is in the test, but you guys also will go further than just saying do a probiotic. You'll recommend a specific probiotic based on the gut, right? So I think sometimes people will be like, oh, I'll just go buy a probiotic, but not all probiotics are created equally. Is that right?
100%. So we have this case study, actually one on sleep that we just posted a few months ago. I'll share with you. There's this mom who, her name is Lauren and her daughter's name is Emma, and had all the colicky conditions, all the gassiness and reflux medication and all that, and then nothing helped her. And so her pediatrician was actually giving her or recommending a probiotic, but it did nothing. And, it's back to the point that different probiotic strains perform different functions. Some of them, they don't affect the community of the microbiome. So at Tiny Health, we think that one of the biggest kind of leverages of a probiotic is to push out the unfriendly bacteria. So if you have 10 seeds and 9 out of 10 is inhabited by an E. coli, for example, then you want a bifidobacteria probiotic with the right strains to come in. And with mom's breast milk or HMOs in mom's breast milk, as I mentioned earlier, that should feed the bifidobacteria to basically recolonize the infant gut and push out the E. coli down to 10%. So 9 out of 10 will be the bifidobacteria from the probiotic. So if you're giving a probiotic with lactobacillus strains, it's just going to pass through their gut and not colonize, because it's just not meant to be an inhabitant of the gut of the infant or even adults. So it's just never going to take seats. Some strains are there to pass through and confer a benefit, a transient benefit, but it's not going to change the composition of your child's gut, which is what we really want in the early life, according to science and what we know about, immune training. So certainly there is a very kind of in the early life, very precise balance that we want. And then there is also a danger of over supplementation. So if you imagine there's already 9 good guys in the theater, if you didn't know that and you kept giving them a bifidobacteria probiotic and you're starting solids, the job of solids is to expand the theater room into 20 and 50 seats, right? And so sometimes if you're giving them too long, these probiotics, then the diversity from the diet wouldn't come in. It's being held, at bay by these probiotics, right? So
Oh,
yeah, there is a danger to oversupplementation in gaining diversity, which you want to see between 6 to 12 months old and beyond. You want high diversity in an infant's and a baby's gut and a toddler's gut. So that's why we say test, don't guess. Now that we have the technology and a resolution and it's at a price point that's pretty affordable, like why wouldn't you test to guide you on supplementation and diet for your child, right? So that's what, I think everyone should test, proactively twice a year. If you have a child under 3, because they're going through this rapid transition and immune training, I would do as much as you can, maybe 3-4 times, 4 times in the first year, and then gradually you may need less. And it could be driven by events like going to a new daycare or weaning from breast milk, things like that, where you can test to see if they're kind of on track and they're the right balance.
that's great advice. And I was already thinking as we were talking, I need to go order a test for myself and retest my daughter. But we weaned, she was still breastfed partially while I did that test, but now she's weaned. So I should go retest just to see differences. But this was so helpful. So I'm so thankful that you took the time to come on today. Do you have any last minute parting words or anything else you'd like to share with us?
No, I think. Oh, you had a question you didn't ask me yet.
I was going to tell you, I forgot. We kind of jumped right in and I was so excited to chat. So how are you currently finding rest in motherhood?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. And one recent thing that I've always known, but I forget to implement is hugging gives you oxytocin. You release this really powerful, good feel oxytocin when you hug. And sometimes when you hug your kids or your husband, it's like really quick, right? So we implemented a 20-second hug rule because that's the time it takes to release that hormone.
I love
at least
that.
20 minutes. So I make my kids count to 20. And sometimes they'll rush through it like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And sometimes, it's funny because they're like 4 and 6, right? So it's really, I love this practice. And I'm also trying to do it more with my husband, my partner, so that I'm hugging him in front of the kids and they see the connection and the love that we have. And it's not just the kids, right? So that's something that, is really creates this
Loving you.
loving environment. And I really enjoy doing that.
I think that's my favorite answer I've gotten from any guest. So that's beautiful. And I'm going to start implementing that too. I saw something recently on Instagram that showed, and this was about teenagers, but it was like teenagers need 5 hugs a day just to like survive. And then it's like 8 hugs a day for something else, but then like 12 hugs a day to fully thrive. And I was thinking that I'm like, do I hug Lila 12 times a day? I mean, I snuggle her, but I'm going to be more mindful of that and add in the 20-second rule. I love that.
Yeah, because they benefit from it, but you benefit from it too.
Totally.
As a mom, right? Kind of like if you're stressed from work and just hug your kid and you're going to feel better too.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. And just to wrap up, I will ask you where we can find you, but I will also just quickly say that I will link the Tiny Health website below. So anyone who is looking and interested in Tiny Health, you can find that below. But where else can we find you, Cheryl, Tiny Health in general? If you can just share that with us.
Yeah, tinyhealth.com is our website. Tiny, not just for babies, but also for the tiny microbes in your gut. I'm on Instagram too. It's at tiny.health. And I am on it. Like I will DM, if you DM us, I will be there to respond. I read almost every email that comes into hello@tinyhealth.com because I'm obsessed with the parents' experience, the customer experience, and I want to know what people are saying about us. So most likely, I will be reading your email if you email in. But Brittni, you also have a coupon code, right?
I do. I was going to say that. So Brittni, my name, Brittni, and I will put that in the show notes as well, will get you $20. I think, Cheryl, $20 off your first. Yeah. $20 off your first test. So take advantage of that. And I just want to say, Cheryl, you truly are an inspiration in the fact that you are a mama, you founded a company. I can tell that it's a very heart-centered company that's focused really on helping parents. And like I said, I know you've changed the lives of many of my clients. You've helped me and my daughter. So I just want to thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This is really fun.
Let's meet up next week too. Make sure to subscribe to the Resting and Motherhood podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. Want to continue this conversation? Head to the show notes for this episode at restinginmotherhood.com/podcast, or connect with me on Instagram at resting_in_motherhood.